Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Black Ink Festival. My name is Natalie Houff, and I am the Deputy Director of Innovation for the Charleston County Public Library, one of the partners of the Black Ink Festival, and also one of the Black Ink Committee members. And here today, we are in the Synopsis and Query Letter Workshop. And we're going to have a lot of great information during this session. You'll find out why having a query letter and a synopsis for your project is essential to the writing process, no matter what publishing avenue you decide to take. And so we're going to introduce Latoya Smith, literary agent and editor with LCS Literary. All right, take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm happy that you all are joining me to hear what I have to say about the perfect pitch and finding the right agent. I have a lot of information to share with you, so I am going to just jump right in, and we're going to leave time at the end for questions. And so I'm going to get started. Now, the first question I'm going to ask you guys is probably going to seem really silly, but it's so important in this process. And that is, do you know what you wrote? And by that, I mean not just in category, but in length. Is it a short story? Is it a novella? Is it a novel? I can't tell you how many times I've met with authors who are not quite sure, or they'll call their story a novel and it'll be under 50,000 words. So you want to make sure that you know what it is that you're pitching. And as I mentioned, a novel is any project that's over 50,000 words. Anything under that is considered a novella, up until about 25 to 50,000 words. And then under 25,000 words would be considered a short story for most publishers. So you want to make sure that you know exactly what it is that you're pitching. Also, a novel is usually what we call a fiction title, and a memoir or business advice book, etc., is how we would categorize your nonfiction. So you also want to make sure that you know your audience, not just the length of your story, but who is the audience that you want to capture for this book. For adult fiction, let's just say, you have different subgenres like women's fiction, romance, general fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal, humor, horror, suspense, you have you. So what you want to do is, if you're writing a fiction book, you want to choose the subgenre that is most likely to connect with your reader. So even if you might have some magical realism in there or a little bit of historical context, what is it most? Okay, that is the easiest way that you're going to categorize. Your project is going by the category it is most like, or whose audience you will most likely capture. And then you might want to add in a little bit about, with a hint of mystery, or, a thriller with a romantic element, something like that. With nonfiction, you definitely want to know if it's a memoir, biography, self-help, advice. Again, all of these things are going to be really, really important to your agent or editor that you're pitching. For children's and young adult, this is actually even more tricky, right? For those of you who might write children's and young adult, because young adult is pretty simple. I mean, that's roughly around the 16, 17-year-old to adult. However, for children's, it is super important that you know which age group you are focusing on. All of them have different requirements when it comes to illustrations, word counts, themes, subject matter, all of that. And it's really different for different age groups, especially 12 and under. So you really want to know exactly where your children's story fits in if you're looking for a children's editor or agent, okay? Who is your target demographic, okay? Who is this book for? What best-selling and or mid-list authors do you write like? And I'm sure you've heard many times you need to know who your comparison or competitive authors are. Comparison means you write like them. Competitive means they are those that you might consider, yourself competing with in the marketplace. So if you are trying to get within a publisher, a comparison author would be an author that publisher publishes like your book. Competitive would be a book in that same space, but from a different publisher, okay? So you want to know not just who the audience is, who that demographic, women in their 30s, men in their 50s, budding entrepreneurs, but you also need to know some bestsellers in that marketplace, both mid-list, meaning up and coming, and big bestsellers, because although we want to be those big bestsellers, many of us have a long way to go, right? So you don't want to be too far out there, but at the same time, you might want to use at least one big selling author that most agents and editors will be familiar with, okay? You don't want your authors to be too old, because as we know, the marketplace changes from day to day, week to week. So try to choose authors and titles that are at least 3 to 5 years old. You don't want to go any older than that. It's going to be really tough to prove the sales, the sales of those books, because as we know, subject matter is cyclical, and so genres come and go, and you want to make sure that the books that you're choosing are sellable today. Okay? Do you know what a best-selling package looks like? Yes, you should be thinking about your cover, your copy, etc. And for your copy, I'm going to talk about why in a minute when it comes to writing that perfect query letter. Okay? Have you researched your competition? Do you know what their social media looks like, books that they have coming up? And the reason that you need to know all of these things is because no one should know your product better than you. Knowing all of these bits and pieces are going to help you not just write the perfect query letter, but also when you get in front of someone, whether it's a potential customer, an editor, an agent, you know what you're talking about, you feel comfortable, you're not stumbling over your words, and you're able to get out what that project is quickly, succinctly, and hopefully in a way that's compelling enough that someone will want to read it. Okay. And this, again, is going to be your start, but also as you go down the line and you continue to sell that book, you need to know how to do this easily and quickly. Okay. Now, right before I talk about writing that perfect query letter, I want you to create a short checklist. Okay. The first thing, is your manuscript complete? I think this is really important for new writers, especially if you're writing fiction. It will be very tough to sell a project or get interest of an agent if your project is not complete. And also, you don't want to lose the attention of an editor or agent if you're pitching them too soon, and then it takes you some time to complete it, and their taste could change later on, or you might find yourself rushing to complete edits because you don't want to lose their attention. And so my advice would be to not query until your manuscript is complete. And by complete, is free of typos, you've formatted it properly, you've had it professionally edited either with a professional editor or beta or critique partner, and you've made sure you've done a thorough read through and spell check after you've gotten all those changes and corrections done from your editor and or beta reader or critique partner. Okay? Because remember, you are dealing with, publishing professionals who are getting pitched 25, 30, sometimes 50 submissions a week. Okay. Yes, a week. So we have to be very selective, and you don't want to get an automatic rejection because your project is full of typos or you rushed it and you were not able to polish it up the way you would like. Okay. So the next portion, now that our manuscripts are complete, they're polished and ready to go, we're going to start working on that pitch. So here's the perfect pitch. And trust me, you can use this on paper and verbally, okay? Once you get down the real meat of what needs to be in there. The first thing is your greeting, okay? Please be sure to address the editor or agent by name. It doesn't look good to say dear agent or dear editor in your query letter. It just lets us know that you haven't really done your research and you didn't really take the time to address this correctly. You don't have to get so much into formalities like Miss, Mr., Mrs., but, greeting them by the first name is perfectly fine, okay? So, dear Latoya, perfectly fine. Your next part of your query letter is going to be a brief introduction to the work. This is going to be a short 1 to 2 lines, which should include your book title, your word count, the genre, and your 2 to 3 comparison authors and or titles. Okay, I'm going to say that again. This line should include your title, your word count, your genre, and 2 to 3 comparison authors or titles. For some of you who are writing books where your subject matter might feel more like a movie you know or a TV show you know, it's perfectly fine to use that as one of your comps, but you still need book comp titles. Because as we know, sometimes things that translate well on TV does not do well in book and vice versa. So you want to make sure that even if it feels a little bit like a TV show or movie, you are also including at least one book reference as well, okay? The next part of your query letter is going to be your short description. This is going to read like back cover copy. I really encourage you all that when you're doing your research on your comp authors, look at those Amazon descriptions, look at that back cover copy. And the reason that you're doing this is because you want to see how they are shrinking down their synopsis or the way in which they describe the story so as you get the most important parts of the story to your reader. So what should be here is the who is the story about? The what are they being faced with? The why should I care about this story, which usually will have something to do with your hook or with whatever issue or problem it is that your character is faced with, which would obviously lead your story into the climax. And the climactical point of your story is kind of where you want to end it. All right. So again, the who we should, be looking at. Who are your main characters? Who are your main players? What is the story about? What is it that they're trying to do in this story? And what big thing are they faced with? Okay. And so oftentimes you might see some of this copy end in a question mark or some really action-packed one-liner. And that's because you're using this to really try and build up enough interest in your reader, whether it's your potential customer, your future agent or editor, to say, oh my gosh, this sounds great. I can't wait to read it. Okay? So you're not writing a synopsis here, guys. You're keeping this short and sweet. It should be no more than a short paragraph or two, and really focus on your main players and the main elements of your story. That last piece of your query letter should be a brief author bio, okay? No more than about 25 words, and you want to stick to the most important details about yourself that will make you appealing to your reviewer. Of course, for you all who have some kind of background in journalism, writing, a backlist, this may be a little easier to write because you have some things to note. For those of you who are new, you might want to focus a bit more on the story elements that make this sellable, or the fact that you have a degree in some, maybe English or, creative writing. Or you've been an avid reader of the genre, and after taking XYZ classes, you're really excited about this debut novel. Anything that you can pull together in your day life, in your hobbies, or things that you enjoy that really speak to why you are the person to write this book. We want to stay away from my mom loved this book, my friends read it and they love it, to a publishing professional. Unless your mom is a publishing professional, that is not going to move the needle. Okay, we want to stay focused. We want to make sure this is professional. You're treating this as a business and you're sticking to those important things that make you and this story sellable. That's what we want to focus on here. Okay. And then your closing should be a thank you, attached, please find your required materials. I look forward to hearing from you. Okay. So again, your query letter includes your greeting, a brief introduction to the work, which should include your title, word count, genre, and comparison authors. The third section is your short description, which reads like back cover copy and will focus on the main elements of your story. And then you will have your brief author bio at the end, as well as your closing, a thank you for your time. Enclosed are these documents. Sincerely, make sure you include your name and your contact information. Full name, contact information. And for contact, put your phone number, any social media you may have, and even your website, and even your email address, just in case. Okay, because this way, if I'm interested in your work, I don't want to have to go looking for your name, what I should be addressing you by, how I get in touch with you if I want to call you, so you want to make sure that you're closing your letters with that information. And as you're perfecting these letters, guys, read them out loud, share them with your friends and family, make sure that it sounds clear and interesting, intriguing. And this is going to be what you will practice to get comfortable with pitching your work. Okay? Because this right here is going to be your great 30-second to 1 minute introduction to yourself. So if you have that 5 to 10 minute pitch with a publishing professional, you've already gotten out the real meat of your story within 2 minutes. And now that leaves you a good 3 to 5 minutes, maybe even 8 minutes to really have a conversation with that publishing professional. Have them get more interested in the meat of the story. Start asking you questions. All right. So once you really nail down these basic pieces of information about your story, that is going to really help you in your verbal pitch. Okay? The next part of a great query is writing a good synopsis. And I know a lot of people have trouble with this. They're not really sure how long it should be. They're not really sure what they should put in there. So the first thing I'm going to say is that if you are only offering a sample chapter, an outline, something like that, if the editor or agent is not requesting a full manuscript, you definitely want to do maybe a slightly longer synopsis. Okay. I say a good synopsis is about 3 to 5 pages. Okay. And you're going to, again, focus on your main characters and your secondary characters. And those are really just the characters that play an important part of the story. We don't need to know every character, but whoever is really key to your story, to your plot playing out, from seeing your main character from point A to point B, you want to include it here. You do not want to leave this synopsis on a cliffhanger like you might do your brief description in your query letter. Okay, this should give the publishing professional a clear idea of what your overall story arc is, your conflicts, problems, or whatever it is that your main and secondary characters are faced with and looking to solve. You also want to discuss how they come to the climax of the story, and then obviously how the story is resolved. Think of it as a book report, okay? You're making sure that the publishing professional has a clear idea of this fabulous story that you've created. All right. And I'm speaking specifically to the fiction writers right now. I'm going to do a slightly different version for any nonfiction folks out there. Okay. So you're going to have this lovely 3 to 5 page synopsis along with your query letter and your sample chapters and or full manuscript. And this is going to be for your fiction pitch. For those of you who are writing nonfiction, your brief description or your back cover copy may look a little different, okay? You might offer a short writing sample. You might sort of offer a sort of bigger picture, concept, and then kind of narrow it down to what your book is and how you fit in this bigger picture idea. I still recommend that you read other books in the same space of the audience you're trying to capture so that you can see how they break down, that description. Because whether you're writing a memoir or advice how-to, as you well know, these books are structured and written very differently. So they're going to be pitched differently. Your memoir might read more like a fiction synopsis, whereas your advice how-to book or your historical, retelling, that might look a little different, and you might need to add some kind of factual information or details. So again, looking at the back cover copy or Amazon, Barnes & Noble descriptions for these books will really help you how to shrink down that description for your query letter. And then for your synopsis, you guys, nonfiction folks, are going to be writing more of a proposal, which means that, yes, you will have an overview of what it is that you're going to be talking about, but that might be more like 1 page. And then the rest of the pieces of your pitch or your proposal, I should say, are going to include a chapter by chapter breakdown where you kind of talk about what each chapter is going to be. You're going to talk about marketing, what promotional things you're planning on doing, who do you know that's going to help you sell this book. So there's going to be a section on that. And then you're going to include at least 3 sample chapters. All right, so your total proposal or your project, that might be more like 30 pages, roughly 30 to 50 pages that you're going to offer to this agent or editor based on their submission guidelines. All right, so you might create something a little different. You might want to have that proposal on hand. You're absolutely welcome to complete the book, but oftentimes, you're able to sell a nonfiction work without a full manuscript. And again, it really just depends on your platform and what you're talking about. Okay. Now I'm going to read 2 examples of some query letters that I've done. Okay. And then, I just want to kind of show you, kind of how I did it a little bit differently for a proposal only author with a track record and a debut author. And again, these 2 examples just happen to be fiction examples. I'm going to try to leave some time at the end so that you guys can ask me your questions, especially those of you who write nonfiction and have some questions. But here's an example of a sample query letter that is just for a proposal of an author with a backlist. Dear editor's name, I am so excited to submit the proposal for author's newest historical romance series, The Cambridge Brotherhood, for your consideration. Second sons were destined to find their own way in a world where the firstborn was heir to everything. Title, lands, and estate of the father, unless the worst should happen. ... In book 1, Quentin Errington is perfectly happy to be teaching economics at Cambridge. The intellectual world is stimulating to him, as opposed to the monotony and persona of London society with which he was raised. But when his eldest brother dies in a horrible accident with some of his friends a week before his wedding, Quentin must take over for his brother, but not without feeling as though he should have been there, should have died too. Instead, he is left with a grieving family, an ailing father, and a responsibility of a dukedom and all that it entails. Quentin has a steep learning curve ahead. Not to mention, there's a sticky situation of an almost sister-in-law, which would have been his perfect match, Lady Catherine. But indeed, they were friends that had grown up together, and because she was betrothed to his brother, he is unsure of this match. Between learning how to be the head of his family's estate, mourning his brother, and trying not to fall in love with his late brother's fiancée, Quentin will need some help, and it's a good thing that he's not alone. Author has published over a dozen titles with Blue Tulip Publishing, New York Times bestselling author Rachel Van Dyken's publishing company, and most recently, her Gentlemen of Temptation series with Kensington Publishing. She has sold over 200,000 copies to date, not including collections and anthologies. I hope you fall in love with this proposal as I have. So as you can see, I focused a lot on plot here. And then I also, in her bio, made sure that we knew the fact that she was an author of some best-selling series. She's worked with best-selling authors. And I made sure to put those copies sold in there, because what publisher does not want an author who can sell books, right? So if you have a backlist, I would suggest combining all of your books, because a bigger number sounds lovely. And you can just say, I have, 20,000 copies sold across 3 series, and I'm excited about this new series, something like that. If your sales are not as impressive, I would focus on great reviews, strong characters, focus on what is appealing about your writing. The next example I have is for a debut author. Dear editor, and this is also based on a full manuscript versus a proposal, okay? I am so excited to share with you this 70,000-word historical fiction novel by author in the vein of fantastic writers like Zadie Smith and Leonard Pitts Jr. It's 1965, hot summer in Chicago, and the West Side is blowing up. Pinky, an 11-year-old girl who looks white but thinks black, is caught in the middle. The riots shatter Pinky's world, but free her to track down the white woman who gave birth to her. But when her beloved baby sister Bettina gets lost in the riots, Pinky has nowhere to turn. Molly Hilton, an Associated Press journalist, is drawn gingerly, then wholeheartedly into Pinky's life. Together, this unlikely pair will score a Pulitzer Prize scoop and untangle the deepest mysteries of this young girl's life. In addition to the CWA Award, Title has won the Scintillating Starts contest and made semifinalists for the Orson Books Novel Prize. Author's first novel, Title, won the Eric Hoffner Award, plus 7 others. His second novel, Title, was a New River Press Novel Contest finalist. His stories and poems have been published, and then I name the publications, and then I just say, in closing, thank you so much for your time and consideration. I look forward to your thoughts. So in this particular case, although it was a debut, he had submitted this particular book for contests and had won some contests and finalized in a few contests. So in this case, I was able to use that to show, look at that. This hasn't even been published before and he's already winning contests. So again, anything that you can use to speak to, the story's strength, your strength as a writer, that's what you really want to point out when you're pitching. Okay? The next thing I really want to point out to you guys is you really, really, really want to pay close attention to the agent or editor's requirements. Every agent or editor has different guidelines, which they will make clear on their websites or on their submission calls or however it is that, they're communicating with you in terms of what they're looking for. So you want to make sure that you're enclosing the right materials and also really reading through those query letters, those first few pages, anything that you're sending them. You don't want to get counted out for having typos, for, calling them by the wrong name. I know it sounds crazy, but I promise you, when you guys start pitching multiple people, it is very easy to accidentally send it to the wrong person. Okay. So you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to what they want and who it is that you're sending to. Also, try not to send it to multiple people at the same agency. Okay, they usually have some kind of database where they can see each other's submissions. So you want to really make sure to do your research, find the right agent for your work, and pitch that one person only at each agency. Okay, so here's a quick checklist for you guys. Before reaching out to an agent, just to go over some things that we just talked about. You really want to know the marketplace. Okay, again, knowing at least 2 to 3 comparison authors within the last 3 to 5 years. You want to have your query letter with those pieces that we talked about, edited, read through, read it out loud, make sure it makes sense, make sure there's no typos in there. You're going to have your 3 to 5 page synopsis, same thing, make sure it makes sense and that there's no typos in there. You're going to have your author bio ready, a short one, just about 25, words. Your polished sample chapters, and for those of you who are debut or new or even maybe switching from one genre to another, make sure you have that completed, polished manuscript ready to go, okay? And then I just want to offer just a few tips for you guys on how to go about finding the right agent for your work. I know many of you, coming to places like this, interacting with us, that's really, really great. But just in case, you want to kind of look elsewhere or you haven't really met your perfect match here, which is possible, but please practice. The first thing I always suggest is as you're doing that research on the bestsellers in the marketplace, you check the look inside on their book pages. Most times you can do this, especially on Amazon. And within those introduction pages, normally authors will thank their agent and or editor in some capacity. So that's a great way to find an agent or editor. Or you can look at that copyright page, which would at least show you what publisher has published this, okay? And if you're trying to get a sense of what the publishers are looking for, sign up for the newsletters, and that will give you a really good idea of what they want. Also, do a general Google search, for, literary agent of upmarket fiction, and a list of folks will probably pop up. Check out their agencies and see who would be a great fit for you. Search websites and social media information from your comparison authors. So a lot of times, again, on their websites or social media, they will list who at least represents them. You may not always see the publisher. You might have to kind of look through their books to find out the publisher's information, but at the very least, most of them will mention who represents them. Okay. And then, of course, you're going to be going on agency websites directly to find out their guidelines and any other useful information about what it is they're looking for and how you can contact them. And just a reminder, do not do what we call a multiple submission, which means you're sending it out to multiple people at the same agency. Also, please allow 8 to 10 weeks before following up, because oftentimes, we do run a little behind. It takes a while. And I always say a slow yes is better than a fast no. So you don't want to get too anxious and keep kind of pestering them into the point where they say, you know what, I'm good on this. I don't want this, be well and best of luck. Oftentimes you want to really kind of give them the time to really take some time and review. I also recommend not doing more than 2 follow-ups. If you've done your first follow-up after the 8 to 10 weeks and you haven't heard anything, I would say give it another 6 to 8 weeks, do 1 more follow-up, and then you can probably start to move forward in your pitching to pitch elsewhere. Okay. And then really quickly, as you guys are doing your search, oftentimes, I think we lose sight of the fact that your agents do work for you. So I know you want to, garner the attention of an agent that you really want to work with, and that's great, but you want to make sure that they're bringing something to the table as well. And at the very least, they love your work, they love you, and they really get where it is that you're going and what it is that you want for your career. Whether you're a nonfiction author or a fiction author, hybrid author, whatever have you, you want to make sure that the agent is not just, a wish list, someone you've always wanted to work with. That is great. That's the cherry on top, right? But the main thing should be that you guys have a great relationship and they really get you and what you're writing. Why? Because you'll be tied to this person for at least the length of whatever publishing agreement they make for you. So you want to make sure they're not too busy for you, that you guys have great communication, they're brainstorming with you. In some cases, they might be helping you do some preliminary edits, either to get the book sold or even throughout the process. They should be keeping you in the loop of the submissions and conversations that they're having with publishers. Again, have a vision for your career and be involved in all steps of the process, not just getting you the deal. Okay, they should be your therapist. They should be your motivator, your business manager. They really should be helping to keep you forward focused and be your advocate within the publishing house, especially when issues arise. And so this is why it's so important to be mindful of who you're choosing and making sure you guys have a great working relationship. Okay, and then also just one final thing that I'm gonna throw out there before I open the floor to questions is, I've had authors ask me, all right, well, when do I part ways with my agent? I'm having some issues. I don't really know what to do. What do you think? The first thing that I'm going to say to you is that, remember, this is a business and this is a business decision. So just like you're going to be very careful about who you bring on as your agent, you also will be careful about when to part ways with that agent. And so if you feel frustrated, you guys are not communicating well, you don't think they're doing a good job for you, they don't have time for you, they're not assisting you in moving forward, or even as simple as you guys just don't have the same vision. Maybe you're ready to move to women's fiction. They're trying to keep you in romance, or maybe you want to write romance and they don't think that's a good idea, or they just don't represent children's, and that's where you're moving into. Have these conversations with them. Make sure that you have exhausted all options to make it work. And then if it's just not working, that's okay. There should be stipulations in your contract with the agent that talks about termination. And you want to make sure to talk about that even as you're looking for your agent, okay? To make sure, here's what happens if, what we hope doesn't happen happens, but you still want to be prepared just in case, okay? And I also recommend, if you do decide to do this, try to do it at the end of a contract, which means this is your last book in this particular deal that they've made for you. And so now you'll be moving on with a new agent with fresh ideas, which is just really helpful for the new agent coming on, because it's a little difficult to come in the middle of something and try to navigate what someone else has done when you yourself have not really worked on that, nor will you probably share in the royalties on that either, to be honest. So just to keep things a little easier and streamlined for your new agent, if you are an author who is parting ways with an agent, I would say, if possible, to try to do it at the end of the contract so that you're starting fresh with a new agent for new projects. And I am going to actually wrap up now because I'm sure I've shared with you guys a whole lot of information. So please feel free to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Latoya. That was amazing. A lot of really good information. I think people were really taking really tedious notes because it was great. I'm going to open the floor. If anyone has any questions, they can ask in the feed, the Q&A, or live through the raised hand. In the meantime, we'll wait for questions to pop in. I was curious, you talked about the length. So you talked about the length of each of the sections, yes. But overall, in general, is there an amount that it shouldn't be more than? It should be more than X number of pages when they've kind of followed the restrictions for each of those.
Or do you mean for the query letter?
Yeah, for the entire letter. Should it not be like a dissertation?
Yeah, definitely not. I think if your query goes over a page, it's too long. Okay, so that's why, you want to just keep it short and concise. Again, this is just a quick introduction to your work. So that introduction, of your title, word count, that should be 1 to 2 sentences max, and then your description, again, very short paragraph, 3 to 5 lines. Again, the back cover copy, I think, is nice to look at as an example, because that kind of helps to show you, okay, I'm not writing a whole synopsis that's like 4 and 5 paragraphs. I'm really just writing maybe 1 to 2 short paragraphs that'll just kind of get the meat of what the story is out there, enough to entice the editor or agent. And then, like I said, your bio, you always want to have a longer one available. But for your query letter, it should be just about 25 words.
And you talked about the importance of spell check and, of course, making sure everything is very clean. But as far as the letter itself, how important is the appearance? Should someone avoid getting too fancy, including graphics or, you said you get so many per week. Would that call someone's attention, or could that actually hurt the person by kind of, distracting from what the actual content is?
I do think that different agents have different requirements, but me personally, I do think sometimes the fancy, or trying to stand out, it can be cute if done well, but if not done well, it could really harm you. And sometimes it's frustrating if I have to look for what I'm looking for. So this is why I always, when I teach these courses, I always say to start with that title, word count, genre, because for the agent or editor, that's really quick to let me know if this is for me or not. And that helps me to kind of move through quickly. So if you've written a 25,000 word memoir and I know I don't take anything under 50,000 words, right away, I'm going to move forward. So that just kind of helps us to streamline. And to me, I think it just makes the information a lot easier. I don't think it hurts to, especially if you are humorous in your tone, or again, you're writing nonfiction, obviously you might want to introduce it a little differently, but just don't make it difficult for us to find the information. And you definitely don't want to have typos in, because this is so short. So the idea is that if I'm struggling to read your query letter, I probably am not going to read anything else you have.
And we have someone with a question. They said, so if we're sending a whole manuscript, a short synopsis like on the back of a book is fine, right? Should it only be long if they ask for a sample?
So I think for a synopsis, yes, if you are writing, if you're, offering up a full manuscript, 1 to 3 pages is perfectly fine. But if they're only asking for like a chapter or two, then I would say a 3 to 5 page synopsis is okay. But don't feel pressured to try to force it into 3 to 5 pages. If you think you can get out everything you need to get out that, really gives the reader a sense of what your story is from start to finish in just a few pages, by all means do that.
And, obviously authors take so much time and care in writing the work itself. Do you feel like that same attention needs to be given to the letter, the same care to the language and the words that are used in the ability to be able to pitch that work?
Absolutely. I almost feel like the query letter is more important than the synopsis because this is your first introduction to the editor or agent. And so I've had times where, someone was trying to be humorous and insulted me, or, I just didn't really find whatever they were saying funny. Or so you want to just be careful because you don't know the personality of the person you're sending it to. Mm-hmm. So what you might find funny or, witty, it might be taken the wrong way. So I always say the proof is in the pudding, meaning the proof is in your writing. I don't pay as much attention to some of those things as I do the writing, but the query letter for me, that's my first, start where, okay, is the word count genre what I'm looking for? Yes. All right. Now I go to the next. Does the story sound like what I like? Oh, cool. And then I actually jump to the sample chapters. And if I really like what I've read, then I go to the synopsis and kind of see where you were going with it. But again, that's me. Other agents might read in different order, but I think as long as those pieces are there, it doesn't matter which order they read it in. All of those materials should be polished and as strong as possible.
And choosing those sample chapters, what should the author be focusing on most when deciding which chapters to send? The climactic, or if it's fiction, or like, what do you think about that?
Well, for fiction, that would be kind of throwing somebody in the middle of something and they have no idea, what it is that they're reading. So I would say when it comes to fiction, whatever your first chapters are what you're going to send. When it comes to nonfiction, though, that's a little different because depending on what you're talking about, you may want to choose 3 top, pieces of advice that you feel like are most relatable, or, that pivotal moment in your life that made you write this memoir. So it's a little different when it comes to nonfiction. You might pick and choose, 2 to 3 really strong chapters that showcase what the book is about, what your writing style is, and things like that. Whereas fiction, definitely don't pick and choose. It's going to be the start of your story.
And we have one more question. So why do we all hate the dreaded synopsis so much, do you think? What is so intimidating about it?
So I think, I'm not, an author per se, so I can't speak for the authors, but what I can say is what I think is the problem is that you've spent so much time, most of you, writing this beautiful book baby that is 200 plus pages more than likely. How the heck do you shrink that down into just a few pages, especially if this might be all that this person reads? And so oftentimes shrinking down, your book baby is hard. And so the author might feel stressed that they haven't written it in a compelling way and that they'll lose their shot if the reader does not read the actual book pages. So a lot of times, authors feel a lot of anxiety because they recognize that the editor or agent may only read your synopsis. And if you're not good at writing a synopsis, you might lose their attention and they may not even get to reading your pages. So I think that's why, a lot of authors invest so much time in it and get so anxious about it. But I will say there have been times where I've read phenomenal synopses and the writing was just not there. Or vice versa, the synopsis was not that great, but the writing was good. And so that's why me personally, I kind of jump to the writing first. And if I'm pulled in by the chapters, then I'm like, okay, where is this going? And then I'll kind of work backwards. But as But that's why I say, if you can, try to make sure all of those pieces are strong, because you never know what that agent or editor's preference is going to be. So you don't want to kind of say, all right, well, my sample chapters are great. Who cares about the synopsis? And now, you might lose their attention because they may not read like me. They may read that first.
Right. So. We'll take one more question before we wrap up. When targeting comparison books, is the focus your voice, plot, readership, or something else?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think it should be all of those things. I think the most general thing would be the audience. So for some, like, let's say you're choosing an author that has many books, but even though there are many books, it's all thriller, so you might say, I write like this author versus choosing a particular book. Now, if a particular book has themes, characters, voice, something that's a little more specific to exactly what your story is, then you might use a title instead of the author's name. Because again, if the author, just writes a bunch of cozy mysteries, then any, cozy mystery fan of that author might be your fan. But if there's one particular story where they deal with, a suicide murderer, I don't know, a suicide bomber and blah, 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 and that's kind of what you're writing about, then I would say, you want to use those titles specifically because, so I think it just depends on which ones relate the most to your book. Or it could be a combination of both. It might be a little bit from this book. So, with the world building and the blah, blah, blah of James Patterson mixed with, the fast-paced action of blah, blah, blah.
Well, thank you, Latoya, so much. This was amazing information. And Latoya is going to give us a treat. So the first 3 people that go to the lounge and visit her table immediately after this session will get a free critique of their query letter. So she will be joining the table, and the first 3 people at that table, she will do that for. Be sure to have your query letter handy so that you can share your screen at the table. Again, thank you so much. And you can catch this if you want to watch this again. I know some people were saying there was a lot of information. You can watch it on the YouTube page for Black Ink, which can be in the welcome email. The link is in that welcome email, as well as on Facebook, the Black Ink Facebook page. Thank you all again, and we'll see you at the next session.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.